Hi, I'm Noga Arbel. I'm the Israelite with Channel Tov News, bringing you unfiltered truth, news, and analysis from Israel. One of the oddest, most fascinating, and disheartening phenomena in Israeli discussion today is that of the question of responsibility for the plight of the hostages Hamas is holding. You'd think it would be obvious Hamas is responsible for it, but it's far from the case. Now, yes, there's a group that has been trying to overthrow the democratically elected government here since 2020. And yes, they're well-funded and connected, and the extreme media here is all too keen to assist in this inane endeavor. But honestly, the extremes these people seem to go to blame Netanyahu for the plight of the hostages, borders on surreal. Hamas brutally murdered 6 hostages for no reason. They were still alive 2 days ago. 2 days before they were found on September the 1st. There is no apparent rhyme or reason for this. Yet thousands of Israelis took to the streets calling to overthrow the Israeli government, accusing Prime Minister Netanyahu of being heartless. The level of psychosis on a grand scale is impressive. And I'm joined now by Tal Koper, educator, publicist, and house philosopher, to try to maybe make some sense of this odd, very destructive, may I add, phenomenon. Tal, how do we get to the point where thousands of Israelis are convinced the Israeli prime minister is the problem? What are we doing wrong?
First thing, nice to see you, Noga, and it's an honor to be here. Usually, I see myself not as the home philosopher, but as an independent thinker, because in the Israeli society, there's not a lot of independence in all this area of thinking. You can see that the universities are one voice. You can see that every institution in culture, academia, and so forth is one voice. So I would say the most important word is independent. And by advising to your question, I must say there's a very interesting thing to see. First thing, the American administration, which is not, I would say, well known to be Israeli right-wing pro-Ben Gvir, even the American administration said bluntly that Hamas is to blame. Unfortunately, when you go to Israel, you see that the question is not a question of policy. There's a very famous phrase by Henry Kissinger. He said, I think, in Golda's Meir, in the time of Golda Meir as a prime minister, I think he said that Israel has no foreign policy, only internal policy or domestic policy. And I would like to adjust it to nowadays. I think that Israel has no policy, but only questions of identity and psychological questions inside our society. So, and you said it very brightly, psychosis. When you look on Israel society, the questions has to come from a psychological and sociological perspective. So this is the first thing to understand. In order to understand what happened in Israel, you need to get out of this rational dogma of a rational player and to look on a very, very, very unique player. I mean, the Jewish people for thousands of years have been outside of, I would say, the program of sovereignty, what we call the diaspora, galut. This word is very famous. And when the state of Israel was created, there was a big question: how you metamorphose yourself from galut, from diaspora thinking, to a sovereign thinking. Ben Gurion tried to do so with the phrase of mamlachtiyut. It means what I would say what the kingdom wants, the rationale of the kingdom, raison d'etat. What is the rationale of the state? What we see is that Ben Gurion's aspiration, I would say, was in vain. I think he didn't succeed, or at least fully succeed. And we see the return of the diaspora thinking, if I would say it. It means you see that the line, the strife come between a question of identity, and you can see this in the street. If you go to the street and you see what people want, they want they want now. It doesn't matter exactly what they want. Peace now. They want
A deal
the hostages
now, they
now.
want the
They
hostages
want
now, yeah.
equality now. Of course. So first thing we see is an emotional or sentimental thinking. This is the first thing to see. In a way, it's kind of an infantile thinking. This is the first thing we see. It means that
This is the Middle East. Sentimentality is not the problem. Everybody is sentimental.
Tell it to the Persians. Tell it to the Persians. The Persians have a lot of sentimentality in their culture. However, they put it in a strategical plans for the far future, for 15 years. What we see is a group in Israeli society that its identity is being consumed by the present. This is number one, present. Everything has to be now. And now swallows the future. The future is being swallowed by the now, by the instant gratification and satisfaction of the needs. What is the need here? The need here is a need in identity. What do I mean? The moment you move the emphasis from a sovereign strategical perspective, when you struggle with an enemy who wants to destroy you and you need to build a plan to survive and to overcome and win. This is a rational thinking. What we see here is the movement from this strategical and I would say rational thinking to again, there's the phrase the shtetl. It means the Jewish town in the diaspora. What I mean is that you see a thinking of the shtetl, and you see that the emphasis, this group emphasize the individual. Everyone suffer. Everyone feel bad. The hostages are suffering. Now, of course, there is an emotional element in it, but when you look on the phrase, everyone being released now, it's like a small child who cry and stumble with his feet and demand something sweet now. Now, of course, it's different. It's not something sweet. It's something much more deep in our society. However, there is a very high resemblance between those two issues. And why? Because the postmodern progressive. What? Sorry.
I'm sorry, but for children, you are supposed to have an adult around that's supposed to tell you you can't have everything now. And it seems like, I mean, to go back to my original question, it seems like we skipped that stage in kindergarten where we try to, delay gratification. And the reason why we teach children to delay gratification is because we want those children to be able to find more satisfaction with something that has more meaning than childish tantrums. So it begs the question how we connect this shtetl mentality with, well, basically age-inappropriate behavior in adults. Why did those two go together?
So we said the now, the present is the first element or the first characteristics of the progressive mind. Number two is the almost narcissist, humanistic, anthropocentric perspective. It means every individual is in the center, every inner psychological soul is in the center, and by this, the suffering of every hostages, it's like suffering in eternity. In a way, it's like for a progressive humanist, what is happening to the hostages is like hell. Not metaphorically, but theologically. It's specifically hell. Now, when you meet those two elements, the ultra humanistic perspective that goes all the way to progressive perspective, and you meet this demand of the now, this victory of the present on the future and the past, you'll find a large group, the elite in Israeli society. When I say elite, I mean a lot of people who obtain positions of power in society. It's not necessarily the best or it's not necessarily the most skilled, but they are the people, in a lot of them, in important positions in society.
And I think it's important, hang on, I think it's important, one second, I think it's important to note that there are not actually a lot of them. They're just very well placed and very loud.
Indeed, it's important because they have, their influence is much bigger than their numbers. There's always a paradox in democracy. The paradox between the majority, which is the masses, the numbers, and I would say meritocracy and elitism, which come and says that there are groups which are better than others in, I would say, IQ or other skills or other elements of your mentality.
But that is true for society, or rather for a system that is built on merit. I mean, when you have a system where the best excels and therefore holds the elite, then that is a fair description of the elite. But as you mentioned yourself, the elite in Israel is enjoying a few legs up on their way there. So another another idiom about things that float to the top come to mind. So you have a group of people who have reached through less than not really meritocratic methods, the top where they can influence society, but they're not doing it because they have something to contribute to it. They're doing it because their grandparents were there and they had something to contribute. And now what we're seeing is basically the leftovers.
The leftovers, I liked it. But I must say, again, I'm talking from a sociological perspective. I look on society as a structure. And in this structure, the manager has more influence than the worker, for example. The principal has more influence than the teacher. And a lot of those people who demonstrate obtain, and by force, those positions of power. It's a fact. I don't think it's the best. I don't have a normative judgment of it. I'm just saying this is a fact. Now, by this element, by understanding this, Sinwar, again, as someone who is, I would say he's in a way part of Israeli society by understanding it deeply and thoroughly. He understands the Western, the progressive, the humanistic mind. Because if we look on his, I would say, ideological forefathers, Hassan el-Banna, for example, or Sayyid Qutb of the Muslim Brotherhood, they analyzed and saw the problems in the West in the 60s and the 70s, and they understood those elements and confronted Islam with them. They created a very interesting ideological structure. Sinwar inherited it from them. Now, he understands specifically the most Americanized part of Israeli society, which is the Israeli elite. By understanding all those factors, their cultural structure, their value structure, he understands how to play with their minds. In a way, he turns them to objects instead of subjects. Instead of being someone who can judge, understand, think, instead of looking on this horrible dilemma between the border with Gaza, between Gaza and Egypt, and those hostages. It's a terrible dilemma because it doesn't matter what you choose, you pay a price. And there are arguments for releasing the hostages and forfeit this borderline, and arguments against it, the arguments to stay there. But this is not a discourse of arguments. This is a discourse of identity. Those people truly think that they are helping the hostages by going down to the street and demonstrate, and I would say dance to the flute of Sinwar. They truly believe that they are doing something good. But in fact, what I claim is that they do what they good in their mind. However, if judging by deeds, it means by empirical influence in reality, they are doing bad. They are doing things that I would say endanger the hostages. So we have a semi-theological, semi-psychological structure that Sinwar understands from the West and in Israel. He uses this understanding in his construction of psychological warfare, I would say even cultural warfare, and he plays the Israeli day. He plays the Israeli narrative. It's amazing to see it. By the way, if I would live somewhere else, I would clap my hand and say, like, it's amazing what he's doing, because he's using them. And I do think, and I do hope that in contrast to other situations as Gilad Shalit and Oslo Accords, today we have a new Israeli right-wing national media, as this channel, as Channel 14, as Galei Israel Radio. We have different mediums in which the rational voice can be heard, not the emotional and the psychological I would say the psychological influence voice.
I'd like to challenge you on that, because I think what you were saying is, in order for the elite to become Americanized or Westernized, they had to actually connect more with the rational part of their brain. So then the disconnect from identity is a disconnect from the emotional part of your makeup. So the reason why, according to what you just said, the reason why they're more susceptible to Hamas's influence is because they lack a core identity. They lack a connection with their emotional makeup. So someone else can manipulate it. And if you look at the type of Israelis that are actually taking to the streets, screeching at the top of their lungs something might as well have been scripted by Hamas and Sinwar. Those are Israelis who are disconnected from the Jewish heritage. They're disconnected from the other people around them. They try to connect to this universalistic idea or ideal that I'm not sure even exists, and they're disconnected from their core identity. Without a defining identity, those Israelis are more susceptible to Hamas's psychological warfare. So it's not...
Indeed.
And you know, Rabbi Zaks has a very interesting interpretation of that. He says that there was also research about this. You cannot make decisions based on the rational part of your brain alone. At the end of the day, what will happen, it was an experiment, people who had different kinds of lobotomies. You get stuck in this ever-going spool of entering more and more information and never actually making a decision. You need emotion and faith in order to actually take the first step, in order to move beyond rationale. And so what you're basically describing is Israelis who do not have that, who get stuck perpetuating calling for something that has to happen now because they have no notion of their past and no notion of where they want to go, and their only existence is here and now.
I must add, and it would be short. First thing first, the Israeli writer Amos Eilon investigated Weimar Germany. It means Germany between the two world wars. And there's a phrase I remember from his book about the a requiem for a dream, a requiem not for a dream, it's a movie, a requiem for Germany. In a way, he claimed that the only true citizens of the Weimar Republic were the Jews. The Jews are very susceptible to believe in these abstract ideals because the Jewish identity is abnormality. And this, I would say, aspiration to be as everyone, to be normal, is very deep. And you always hug all those options to be normal. It doesn't matter if it means to be communist, it means to be German nationalist, it doesn't matter. Now, when I look on what you say, my claim is a bit more, I would say, even simple. Those people live in, I would say, the short time or the small time, the little time, I don't know how to translate it exactly, of Zionism. It means Herzl created us, and since then, this is our history.
Late 1900s and on. They have an existence of 150 years tops.
Indeed. Now, on the other hand, you have the long, or I would say the historical thinking of Judaism, who goes 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And those two identities struggle as we talk today in Israel. And we see this struggle. Those who demonstrated, demanded the now, demanded the present, demanded the ultra-humanist prospect now. Release the hostages. Those who are against this deal, to my opinion, they have a claim that go all the way to, I would say, the Israeli kingdom, the idea of Jewish sovereignty, the idea of Jews as part of history and Jews as an historical nation. And they have a more, I would say, a longer perspective on the situation. Look what's going to happen. What will it bring us? Those who say you don't need a deal now says and claim that it can bring disasters. Those who demand deal now doesn't see those disasters because the future does not. I would say the future, for them, there is no future. There's only bits of present. This one and the other one and the one after it and so forth. So in a way, it's a question of what is your historical perspective, and from that, what is your identity?
Tal, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much, but that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you for allowing me to express my independent thinking.
I'm sure we'll have you over again. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Noga Arbel with Channel Tov News, Truth, News, and Analysis from Israel. If you like our content, please share and subscribe. And don't forget to join us again.